seem a little confused to you today, but I'm trying to follow along the bulletin with regard to how I have everything set up for me, and it's a little different in the bulletin, and it's like, my head is bouncing around. So I apologize, but the scripture this morning is taken from the Gospel of Luke, Luke chapter 14, verses 15 to 24. When one of those at the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, "Blessed is the man who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I have just bought a field, and I must go and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen, and am on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.' Still another said, 'I just got married, so I can't come.' The servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, 'Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town, and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.' 'Sir,' the servant said, 'what you ordered has been done, but there is still room.' Then the master told his servant, 'Go out to the roads and country lanes, and compel them to come in, so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet.'" Amen. I know, I just have an aversion to microphones. I brought a whole load of sisters, so I had to have a big mouth. The great banquet. A man once gave a great banquet and invited many people. And notice that he gave the banquet. He did not sell tickets. He didn't run specials. It was a free gift. He invited many. The banquet was a free gift to enable him to share some joy in his life. Perhaps it was the wedding of his oldest son. Perhaps it was the visit of a very important dignitary to his home. Perhaps it was the healing of a disease for his wife. Perhaps it was some particular victory that he had won. Whatever it was, behind this great banquet, there was a tremendous sense of joy in the life of the host, and great desire to share that joy. In the Old Testament context of the banquet, we see it in what we had for the opening this morning after the intro. We read it. I was supposed to read it now, but that's okay. We've already read it. And you see, this is the great banquet. We don't understand the power of the story Jesus told until we begin to visualize the fulfillment of a prophecy in Isaiah 61, verses 1 through 3. The prophecy was something the Jewish people carried in their hearts. Through the long, many years, they kept saying, "Someday, someday, someday." And then Jesus told the story with an incredible announcement. "Come, for all is ready." All is now ready. The focus is upon all is now ready. Now is the time. When a banquet invitation went out, it really went out in two stages. There was an initial invitation. Servants would go out and say something like this: "My master is giving a great banquet, and he would be honored by your presence." And people would answer, "It is a great honor to be invited to the master's house. I would be pleased and honored to attend." So depending on the number of acceptances, then the animal would be killed and the banquet would be prepared. When you accept an invitation that day to attend that banquet that night, you are expected to be there. You know, modern day, we send out a wedding invitation. You send back a little card, RSVP, send it back saying, "Yes, I will be there." And once they get that count, if they're getting married and then having a big reception somewhere where it's being catered to, it's really an insult to not show up because they have to pay for that dinner whether you're there or not. But it was different back then. After you were expected to be there, the animal has been killed, the host has made preparations. Everything then depends on the acceptance of the second invitation. It was an unthinkable insult, a cruel indignity to accept the first invitation and then reject the second one. And that is what is happening. They went out and said, "Come, for all is now ready." And they're rejecting the second invitation. That is the real horror that is described in the story. Servants go out for the second time saying, "Come, for all is now ready." People knew that they would have an incredibly delicious meal. They would wear special garments to the banquet, a garment of white cloth, actually called a garment of praise, as it says in Isaiah. The guests would be greeted at the door and have their heads adorned with flowers. Their feet would be washed. Their hands and feet would be anointed with oil. They knew that. They would be royally received and entertained with the most beautiful music, the most glorious entertainment available. To reject that was shocking and devastating. But they all alike began to make excuses. That is why the response of the people is so utterly devastating. The excuses themselves were ridiculous and absurd. The people who listened to the story would have seen that and they would have cried out, "Oh no!" Some of them would have burst out laughing because the whole excuse would have been so utterly humorous. The first man said, "I have bought a field and I must go and see it. I pray you have me excused." The man who bought the field was saying that the field was more important to him than his relationship with the host. And that is really the message that is given to God by our excuses. Notice that there is a pattern to each excuse. The person who has received the invitation said, "I did this, and now I must do this. Please excuse me." The second man expressed an even more absurd excuse. This would have caused the listeners to laugh at such ridiculous words. I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to examine them. I pray you have me excused. No one does that. The idea of purchasing 5 yoke of oxen and then going out to inspect them was utterly ridiculous and absurd. It would be like a man calling his wife on their anniversary when she had gone to tremendous trouble to prepare a wonderful, delicious meal, and saying to her, I have just talked to this wonderful salesman on the phone, and I won't be able to make it home tonight for dinner for our anniversary, because I have purchased 5 used cars. It's a chance of a lifetime offer. And I have got to go down right now to determine their year, their color, their model, and be sure they will start. And the third man's excuse sounds more reasonable. He says, I've married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. Now, we have such respect for family life and are so concerned about keeping families together, we would say to him, good for you. We are glad you put your wife above the invitation. The point is, however, it's an excuse. He probably wouldn't be home anyway. If he had gone to the banquet, he would have been home by 8 or 9 o'clock, because banquets did not last that long. And besides that, he says, I've married a wife. Did you know that in the morning? You know, I think marriage takes a little bit more preparation than deciding, this morning, oh, I love you, let's get married tonight. I mean, it is awfully silly. It was a rejection of the hospitality of his host to offer that kind of excuse. And everyone knew it, and they would have laughed at that excuse as well. Jesus told this story in the home of a ruler of the Jews who belonged to the Pharisees. Now, they were trying to trap him and to trick him. He was telling the parable to enable them to see themselves in their excuses. They had accepted the invitation to be God's people. They had rejected the invitation that God has given in Jesus Christ. What was the result of that rejection? Well, we get a clear description of the rejection. Notice that the banquet was not canceled. The host did not say, well, if no one's going to come, I'm just going to call it off. I'm just going to cancel the whole thing. Instead, the master gathered his servants together and said, go quickly to the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in the poor and the maimed and the blind and the lame. You see, these are people who would not have gotten an invitation to a banquet. The maimed could never get married, so they would never have the excuse of having to stay home with a wife. The blind could never buy a field. The lame could not plow with an oxen. This group represents the outcasts of Israel. They were the very people who responded to Jesus, those whom Jesus healed and touched. Pharisees were constantly criticizing Jesus because of his association with sinners and with the outcasts. The report comes back, "Sir, what you have commanded has been done, and still there is room." And the master said to the servant, "Go out to the highways and hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be full." And it's very important for us to understand the phrase, "Go into the highways and hedges and compel the people to come in." There was a strong custom that when an unexpected invitation from a high-ranking person was received, it must be refused. The guests of lower social rank, even if they were half-starving, would feel enormous cultural pressure to refuse. The poor people must be convinced that their presence was actually desired, that the host really meant the invitation. The servant would talk and would insist. And then the poor people would be gently taken by the arm and actually led into this great banquet. They would be assured again and again, "My master really wants you. He asked me to bring you into the banquet. There is a place for you. You will not be rejected." And the story closes with a surprising note. "For I tell you that none of those men who have been invited shall taste my banquet." That is indeed a sobering note. It is a reminder that God takes our freedom seriously. When we reject Jesus Christ, God allows that rejection to work its natural consequences. That is why it is so imperative to take seriously God's "Come, for all is now ready." The gospel of grace also talks about time running out, about the closed door and the outer darkness. Yes, there is an amazing invitation. Grace is free, but it's not cheap. If it is rejected, it is of no benefit to us. It has no meaning to our lives. There will be a time when our excuses are held up into the light of God's judgment, and their real nature will be revealed to us and to others. There are no drive-through windows to the great banquet. There are no takeout orders in the great banquet. You come in, or you stay out and miss out. Amen. Let us turn to our hymn number 699.